Okay, my name is Giles Trendle. I'm the acting managing director of Al-Dschasira English, as well as the director of programs of Al-Dschasira English. So, Al-Dschasira English is a 24/7 international news and current affairs channel, and my role involves overseeing all of our staff and our output. So we have, we have 400 plus staff, so over 400 staff, and we have around 70 bureaux around the world. We have four major offices. Obviously, Doha is our headquarters. We have a big office in London, a big office in Washington DC, and then another office in Kuala Lumpur. So we cover the continents, and then we have lots of smaller bureau manned by 1, 2, 3 different people at a time. It's an incredible operation, never stops, obviously 24/7, and my role is, as I said, to manage the staffing and to manage the content that we produce. We create obviously news. We have news bulletin every hour and every half an hour, and in between we'll have programs, documentaries, talk shows, magazine shows, all sorts of different programming, and as well as the TV, we have the online side. We have a digital side, so we have a website, and we have content. We create content that goes out on many different digital platforms. Obviously the obvious ones, Facebook, YouTube, but also things like Snapchat, Instagram. It's a long list of digital platforms that we use, so I won't go into them all, but it's a very exciting. We like to consider ourselves at the forefront of the digital revolution. I studied in London. I studied English literature and language and philosophy at university. And after I finished university, I became a teacher of English as a foreign language, and I ended up in Beirut, Lebanon. There was a war going on at the time. This was back in 1985. And so after a couple of years, I taught a year in Beirut and then a year in Cairo. And then I realized after 2 years of teaching that I actually wanted to be a journalist. So I went back to Beirut in 1988, and because there was the civil war was ongoing and it had just sort of escalated again into a new load of fighting, there were not many journalists at the time there. There were very few Western journalists because of the danger of kidnapping at that time. So I took a risk. I went to Beirut and I called The Economist news magazine one day and I said, I'm in Beirut, you don't know who I am, but should you need anything, I'm here. And that was my first break in journalism. Back in those days, I started with The Economist as a freelance, and then it sort of snowballed. I did stories for the Sunday Times and then other newspapers and magazines. So I started as a print journalist in the late 80s. And in Beirut during the sort of last few years of the Civil War and the hostage story, which was a big international news. And several years on, I then realized actually I wanted to get out of more of the news and get more into more analysis, because I enjoyed analyzing and I was reporting. I was doing radio reports. I was reporting on television, but not on screen, but on a sort of phono, because of the technology at that time wasn't great. But then I got involved in documentaries, and then became a filmmaker myself over many years, made many films, worked on many films. And then in 2004, after having been in the Middle East many years and being involved in independent documentary filmmaking, journalism, I was one thing led to another, and I was offered a role at Al Jazeera Arabic, which I wanted to join because I had become very disillusioned with the Western media and the way the Western media was reporting the Middle East, and I felt that it would be fascinating to work for an Arab language media deeply involved in the Middle East, which had been my experience. And so I joined Al-Dschasira Arabic. I spent 2.5 years at Al-Dschasira Arabic working as a senior producer on the top investigative show. It was a show that, among many of its claims, it was got the exclusive to interviewing and meeting the masterminds of the 9/11, Ramzi bin Rashid and Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. So I spent 2.5 years working on this program, and then Al-Dschasira English started, so I moved across and have been at Al-Dschasira English for 10 years now. Yeah, I mean, when I had been in Lebanon, and I came back to the UK, and I found it very difficult, even though I was coming back just for a few weeks because I was then going to go back to Lebanon. I found it incredibly difficult to return to the UK. I had a sort of reverse culture shock. Because in Beirut for a year I had been living with car bombs, militia street fighting, the continual risk of and fear of kidnapping, and to live that throughout for one whole year. And then when I went back to the UK for a short visit, I think I was very strange to my family and friends because I was wanting to talk about all my experiences, and they maybe didn't want to know all these details. I found it very difficult to realize that the main topic of conversation was the cost of a pint of milk or whatever. And it was such a, as I said, a reverse culture shock. I found it incredibly difficult to readjust. And I would come and go, but there was one occasion when I spent a solid 2.5 years in Lebanon without leaving the country during the most intense part, the ending of the Civil War, which was a very bloody time. And when I did eventually leave, I just sort of, I think I collapsed and my body just stopped, and I became paralyzed on the left hand of my body. I was paralyzed for about 1 week. I think it was an extreme just coming out of such a highly stressed environment. I just laid in bed for a week. I went to see a doctor later, and everything seemed fine, but he seemed to suggest it was post-traumatic stress syndrome. It took a lot of time and a lot of internal thinking to try to process what I had experienced and what I'd been through. And of course I'm the lucky one because I can get out of the country. I was making a film in Iraq, and I'd spent about 3 months in Iraq just after Saddam Hussein fell. We were making a film, and then I got a call from a colleague who gave my number to somebody at Al-Dschasira because they'd heard about me, just wanted to have a coffee. I met this person, and over the course of several months we would have coffees together, and in the end he said, "Oh, you should, there's a job going at Al-Dschasira Arabic if you're interested." And I said yes. I went for the interview, and it just started from there, and they offered me the job. For me it was a natural move. I had been so much in the Middle East. I working in journalism in the Middle East. It was and not being a journalist who would fly in and fly out. I lived and worked and lived in the Middle East with the people. Yeah. No, I was in the bomb shelters with the Lebanese, sharing everything with them. And during my times in Beirut, and so it was very natural for me I felt it was a natural step to move across to Al-Dschasira Arabic. It gave me a chance to continue to see it from a perspective that I felt was more comprehensive than being either limited or even distorted by the Western media. I felt I was going to be working for an organization that was willing to go deeper and have a more comprehensive look at this important and fascinating region with all its complexities, and not simply stereotype or simplify things, but it's all over the world. We're an international channel, and by international we really are international. I mean, if you go into our newsroom you'll see the diversity of our staff, of multilingual, multicultural, and that diversity is infused in our staff and is infused in our content. We like to say, one of our previous slogans was "Voice of the Voiceless." I think it's been taken by many other people, but it did. When we started, it was very much, we are providing an alternative perspective to that you would get from what we would call the mainstream media, which might be in the BBC or CNN or Deutsche Welle or whatever. We take great pride in our editorial quality and our editorial standards and our editorial perspective, which is to really tell the story from the bottom up, tell it from the point of view of the people, not have a helicopter view, and really to get on the ground. That's why we have so many bureaux. It helps us get on the ground, report from the ground, and really find and hear the stories of people who are at the center of the stories. And that's really our editorial ethos and our editorial mission. And in terms of language, yes, we're English language. So in terms of being directly different from someone like the BBC, we, for example, the royal wedding between Prince William and Kate Middleton, we wouldn't cover that. It was of no significance for us. We might have a little brief report on it, but it's certainly not headline news, and it might figure number 5 or 6 in our bulletin, or even not even that. I mean, we really are international in terms of the international significance of current affairs. We don't have these quaint agendas which are in some way or another parochial or domestic. We truly are an international channel. So apart from, so that we have our news, but then our programming, we have different types of programming. We have our talk shows, which, like Inside Story, is daily, which is reflecting current affairs, or whatever's happening that day. We'll have something like The Stream, which is again another talk show, but it's about what's happening in the social media, and what's the conversation going on in social media platforms, and reflecting that in a program. We have a program called Upfront coming out of DC, which is another talk show with our presenter Mehdi Hassan. So those are talk shows. Then we have what we call magazine shows, like the Listening Post, which is made of different packages within a half-hour show. The Listening Post focuses on dissecting the world's media. I think we always felt that was a very important thing to do, given we started 10 years ago, and now we see more than ever it's so important to analyze the media, and how you can look at societies by reflecting through the prism of the media. We have a program called Earthrise, which is again a magazine show that's focused on the environment and climate change. And then the other big genre or type of programs we have are our documentaries, which are either half-hour or 1-hour documentaries. Some are one-offs, some are series. We have a very strong documentary unit. We recently won some nice awards from the New York Film Festival, which we'll be going to in a couple of weeks' time, for some of our documentaries. And that's a whole range of different programs. We have a very famous strand called Witness, which is a very much character-based documentary strand. We have other strands like 101 East, People in Power, Fault Lines. These are investigative documentary strands. We invest a lot in our investigative journalism. We feel it's very important. So those are different types of program: talk shows, magazine shows, and documentaries. All centered on finding the characters who tell the stories. We don't want to tell stories for people. We want the people to tell the stories themselves, and that they become the agents of their own storytelling. Really, the subject matter could be anything, but if you find a strong character who owns their story and can tell their story, That's gold. We don't like to make victims of people and tell stories of people as if they are just victims and they have no agency in their story. We like to find people that can own their own story. They might be desperate and they might be victims, but they have the ability to tell their story. And so that's really our starting point, is to find those sorts of stories, those sorts of people. And the ones, yes, I think the flying through the bushes in wherever it was, Bolivia, the plane flyers in Colombia who were landing, you had the pilots who could tell those stories, and they're authentic because they are the people at the center of the stories. And so that's what we're looking for, authenticity. Climate change, I see that climate change happening in the sense of socio-political climate change. I think our societies are becoming more divided, more toxic, more probably intolerant. I think bigotry and racism are on the rise, and so we see it as our job is to provide a greater scope of understanding and insight in order to inform people and provide information. But I do see societies becoming more divided than ever. We're seeing it in Europe. We've seen it in America. Obviously, in the Middle East, it's been very divided, and so I think the political environment is becoming more toxic in many different countries where it hadn't been necessarily that before. In terms of being journalists, we have to remain as objective as we can, balanced, fair, neutral as much as we can. It's our job to provide a plurality of informed opinion, and to report in a world that's becoming actually increasingly dangerous for journalists as well. Media is coming under attack, both verbally from President of the United States, who says the media describes it as the enemy of the people, but also physical attack. We as Al-Dschasira, we have had a very tough experience over the years of having our journalists either killed, targeted, harassed, arrested, detained, imprisoned. So we have a very tough experience of the media coming under attack, and so we are great champions of media freedom and everything that means, because without media freedom, I think you are endangering democracy.